So this morning, looking at news sites, something caught my eye. The first thing that I saw was a statement that Israel has gone into DEFCON 3. Now, I'm not a military guy, but I know that DEFCON, the DEFCON warning system or the DEFCON preparedness system, is exclusive to the United States. No other country. I knew right away something wasn't right. So I clicked on it to find out who it was that was making this claim, and it was none other than Steve Bannon, a pro-Russia commentator that lives in Israel. He blames the United States basically claims Russia's innocence in this whole fiasco that's going on in the Middle East. And so I did my due diligence first before I go and try to shout to everybody that Israel does not have a DEFCON system. I looked high and low. Sure enough, it's exclusive to the United States. Israel does not have a DEFCON system, okay? And so that statement he made was false. What I want to do is to remove any doubt that Russia is behind everything that's going on against Israel today. And in order to do this, you have to go back in history. Okay? Now, I've touched upon a few of those things in the last couple of days, but what I want to do is summarize today. I believe it all started in 1967. And so what I'm going to do is go to The Guardian, theguardian.com. And this article, I don't see a date on here. Nope. Anyway, you can Google it. You can. The title is "How 6-Day War Almost Led to Armageddon." The morning of June 10, 1967, was a time of great concern and utmost gravity in the White House Situation Room, according to Llewellyn Thompson, a former ambassador to the USSR turned presidential advisor. A message had been received over the Moscow-Washington hotline threatening Soviet military action that would lead to a nuclear confrontation. New evidence now reveals what actions the Soviets were preparing: a naval landing on Israel's shores to prevent its total victory in the Six-Day War. The Soviet Union had played a central role in escalating tensions in the Middle East and falsely accused Israel. Does that sound familiar? Didn't I say yesterday they were falsely accusing Israel, that they created a false flag situation so that they would falsely accuse Israel? Didn't I say that? All you have to do is go and look back in history. It's repeating itself. Falsely accused Israel of massing forces on the Syrian border. For the first time, Moscow sent much of its Black Sea fleet into the Mediterranean. Notice how history is repeating itself. Sound familiar? And backed up the Egyptian president Gamal Abdel Nasser when he blocked Israeli shipping in the Red Sea and demanded the removal of the United Nations force from Sinai. In memoirs published recently, Nikita Khrushchev said the USSR's military command persuaded its political leadership to support these steps, knowing they were aimed at starting a war to destroy Israel. On June 5th, after Israel launched a preemptive strike against its Arab neighbors, the Soviet Prime Minister Alexei Kosygin had activated the hotline to Washington for the first time since it was installed following the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. I went into my office every morning at 7 o'clock, said the then Secretary of Defense, Robert S. McNamara. At 7:15, the telephone rang. Mr. Secretary, this is General Smith in the war room. Kosygin is on the hotline and wants to talk to President Johnson. What shall I tell him? I said, why the hell do you ask me? He said the hotline ends at the Pentagon. It wasn't even a telephone line, but then a teletype, and I didn't even know it ended there. Mr. McNamara called the sergeant standing guard outside Lyndon Johnson's door and ordered him to wake the president. Within 15 minutes, they and the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, had begun what became a nearly continuous reference in our conference in the Situation Room. On June 10, according to Kosygin, Israeli forces were headed for the Syrian capital, Damascus. The U.S. no longer had a manned embassy in Damascus and, incredibly, had no independent assessment of the Israeli offensive on the Golan Heights. Here we go about the Golan Heights again, folks. This is a repeat of history. I'll tell you where I'm getting at in a few minutes. The director of the CIA, Richard Helms, was called in, but the best he could do was to try and reach friendly powers which still had missions in Syria. Kosygin's message went on. A very crucial moment has now arrived which forces us, if military actions are not stopped in the next few hours, to adopt an independent decision. We are ready to do this. However, these actions may bring us into a clash which will lead us to a great catastrophe, or which will lead to a great catastrophe. We purpose that you demand from Israel that it unconditionally cease military action. We propose to warn Israel that if it is not fulfilled, necessary actions will be taken, including military. You see, they threatened to invade Israel before. This ain't the first time. Mr. McNamara recalled, in effect, said, Mr. President, if you want war, you'll get war. The presidential advisor, McGeorge Bundy, later remembered that there had been considerable discussion about what, in fact, the Soviets would be able to do to the Israelis if they did try to carry out their threat. The Russians' possibility were really not that impressive. The Russians' possibilities were really not that impressive. But now a first-hand account from one of the Soviet officers involved reveals that the Soviets were nonetheless poised to invade Israel. In June 1967, Yuri Kuripinov was a young gunnery lieutenant on board a BPK, a large anti-submarine ship of the Soviet Navy, part of a large reinforcement for the Mediterranean flotilla, which had arrived from the Black Sea base of Sevastopol in early May. In an interview, Mr. Kripunov, I can't say the name, now 59 and respected writer and educator, said that when Arab hostilities broke out, his captain ordered him to raise and command a 30-man detachment of volunteers for a landing on the Israeli coast. Similar parties were being assembled on all the 30-odd Soviet vessels in the Mediterranean, a total of some 1,000 men. There were also one BDK with about 40 tanks and maybe a battalion of infantry. Mr. Kripunkov said his platoon was ordered to penetrate Haifa, Israel's main commercial harbor and navy base. Only one of the ship's sailors refused to volunteer. He was later transferred off the ship, but nonetheless punished, but not otherwise punished. Mr. Kripunkov himself had no hesitations. I was young and foolish, he said, even though the seamen were neither trained nor equipped for a commando raid on the land. We were supposed to accomplish with my pistol and the sailors' AK-47s. Get in there and see, they told us. Wipe out enemy forces. It was a different world then. I had a holy faith in it all. The Red Army, my officer's oath. We were going on a sacred mission. The Israeli aggressors had assaulted these poor Arabs, and we were going to let them have it. Today I'm wiser, and I probably wouldn't do it. Mr. Kripunkov account confirms how near the Soviets came to implementation of a contingency plan. An officer of the GRU, that is, the Soviet military intelligence, later told a senior American analyst that the defense minister, Andrei Grechko, and his team wanted to provide the progressive Arabs with a unique and historic achievement, the destruction of Israel. For which they would remain eternally beholden to Moscow. There you have it, folks. Now you know the motive. You just heard it. Though the Soviets were confident of the Arabs' capability to defeat Israel, the contingency plan was prepared. While the landing force would probably have been overcome by Israel, it might have caused substantial casualties and might have halted the Israeli advance. But as Mr. Kripunkov points out, the gamble was much larger, globalizing the conflict. There would have been no Israel left if we had landed. I've studied special weapons, and even without a hydrogen bomb, 10 to 15 warheads would have been enough. Mr. Kripunkov and his men were well aware that they were little but pawns in a global power play. 1,000 men was nothing for the USSR, he said. They started counting at 5M. Each side wanted to demonstrate its dominant role. The U.S. sent in the 6th Fleet. Sound familiar? We bring in our Black Sea Squadron. They send in spy planes. We start preparing a landing in Israel. Sound familiar? The Israeli tanks move through Sinai and are ready to skip over the Suez Canal. What then? We land our force and World War III begins? We knew it was going to happen. That the whole world would be destroyed. They knew it. And yet, they insist on playing out the same exact scenario today. Playing Russian roulette until a bullet is in the chamber. This was the grave catastrophe threatened by Kosygin. A member of the Israeli General Staff at the time recalls hearing that a Soviet landing had been discussed as a theoretical possibility at cabinet sessions. But there is no evidence that Israel or the U.S. knew the particulars of the impending operation. Mr. McNamara dismissed the suggestion that, ironically, Israel itself may have prevented an early warning of this threat when its warplanes attacked and disabled the American intelligence ship, the Liberty, in the Mediterranean on June 8th, thus possibly crippling U.S. capability to eavesdrop on Soviet ships in the region. but the ships never landed, and Moscow's failure to intervene caused the Soviets considerable trouble with their protégés, including Cuba. Immediately after the Six-Day War, Kosygin hastened to Havana to placate Fidel Castro's anxieties, and according to the CIA cable, informed Castro that the USSR had prepared to aid the United Arab Republic, aka Egypt, in the struggle against Israel, but the Field Marshal, Amir, chief of the Egyptian Armed Forces, told the USSR that the United Arab Republic intended to stop fighting within several days. All right, so, of course, we know what happened in 1967, don't we? But now you know. Now you know what the Russians' role was in the 67 war. Everybody thinks that the 67 war was about the Arabs. In all truth, no. It was about the Russians. The Russians orchestrated the whole thing. And then came the war of attrition. Once the Arabs were defeated. War of attrition. This is on Wikipedia. Involved fighting between Israel and Egypt, Jordan, PLO, and their allies from 1967 to 1970. 1967 to 1970? All right. I'll read a little bit of it. I suggest that everyone go to this. It's just look up War of Attrition and you'll see it. I won't read all of it because I need to once again talk about the episode in 1970, as I did the other day. Following the 1967 Six-Day War, no serious diplomatic efforts tried to resolve the issues at the heart of the Israeli-Arab conflict. In September 1967, the Arab states formulated the Three No's policy, barring peace, recognition, or negotiations with Israel. So, the Three No's are no peace, no recognition, and no negotiation with Israel. Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser believed that only military initiative would compel Israel or the international community to facilitate a full Israeli withdrawal from Sinai, and hostilities soon resumed along the Suez Canal. These initially took the form of limited artillery duels and small-scale incursions into Sinai, but by 1969, the Egyptian army judged itself prepared for larger-scale operations. In March 8, 1969, Nasser proclaimed the official launch of the War of Attrition, characterized by large-scale shelling along the Suez Canal, extensive aerial warfare, and commando raids. Hostilities continued until August 1970 and ended with a ceasefire. The frontier remained the same as when the war began, with no real commitment to serious peace negotiations. And then what happened? Let's see, I hope I haven't lost it. I have to look for it again. Operation Rimmon 20. That's R-I-M-O-N 20. Look it up. Wikipedia. Rimmon 20, or Pomegranate 20, was the code name of an aerial battle in 1970 which pitted the Israeli Air Force against Soviet fighter pilots stationed in Egypt during the War of Attrition. Israel chose its most skilled fighter pilots to participate in the planned dogfight in order to send a message to the Soviet Union. During the 3-minute engagement which took place on July 30, 1970, the Soviets were dominated by their veteran Israeli counterparts, resulting in the downing of 5 Soviet-flown MiG-21s by Israeli F-4 Phantoms and Mirage 3s. Egyptian military leaders were satisfied to hear the outcome of the battle because the Soviets had long been criticizing Egypt's aerial losses to Israel and attributed them to the lack of skill in its fighter pilots. It is one of the final engagement of the war of attrition which believed to have been contributed to its conclusion. Yes, folks, the Israelis sent the Soviets, the Russians, with their tails between their legs back home. And then, finally, Anwar Sadat kicked the Russians out of Egypt. They went home. But now they're back. Which brings me to a statement that's made. Now, actually, in all truth, they came back in, 1973. Let's go look at that one. They did come back. They were sent home in 1970, but they came back. But it still brings me to a statement that's made in Ezekiel 38. I will go ahead and go there, but I'm going to go and we're going to look at the 73 war once again. Okay. Verse 3, and say, thus saith Jehovah Elohim, behold, I am against you, O Gog, Rosh, prince of Meshach and Tubal, and I will turn you back, or return you back. Turn them back this way. Why? Because they had gone back home. How do you turn them back if they hadn't been there already and gone back home? And put hooks in your jaws. Now, we'll go to Ezekiel 39. And I'm going to read it exactly as it is out of the Strong's Concordance, not out of King James Version. Very important to do this so that we are not deceived. Verse 2, I will turn you back. It's turn you back means it's a shub, 7725. It means return because they were there before and were sent home. Now they're going to be caused to return. And where it says, leave but the sixth part of you, it's Shawshaw, 8338. That is to lead on. To drive. And then the word annihilate is here. What? To bring them back? To make them return for annihilation? That's right. Go look in your Strong's Concordance. And I don't know why they have leave by the sixth part. Annihilation is not leaving the sixth part. See, it says a primitive root, apparently to annihilate. It says leave by the sixth part by confusion with shasha. You see, there's confusion here. Okay, folks, we've just learned something today. I have just learned something today. This is what happens when you keep an open mind. So now let's look at it. Let's go back and look at Ezekiel 39, verse 2 carefully. Verse 2, I will turn you back and annihilate you. Or I will turn you back for annihilation. Why? Why would he turn them back for annihilation? Because he's angry at something they did when they were there before. Now let's go to the 73 war. Hope I haven't lost it. I'll get there. I'll find it eventually. I have too many things up here. Okay. Let's see. The 1973 war, I believe, was the Yom Kippur War. All right. Now, I'll read something from IsraelNationalNews.com. That's a summary. That doesn't go into a whole lot of detail, but goes into enough detail where you see how extremely serious the situation is. And the title of the article is, Did the Soviets Deliver Nukes to Egypt in 1973? The United States went on high alert in October 1973 because of intelligence indicating that the Soviet Union was delivering nukes to Egypt. The United States went on at the height of the Yom Kippur War. So during the Yom Kippur War, what was happening? The Soviet Union was delivering nukes to Egypt. Newly classified CIA papers show. And of course, this article was back in 2016. It has long been known that National Security Council under President Richard Nixon ordered a DEFCON 3 alert, the highest available in peacetime, because of a possible nuclear threat against Israel. What was not known until last week, when the CIA declassified its briefings for Nixon, what had triggered the concern. Tim Naftali, a presidential historian who has directed the Nixon Presidential Library, reviewed the documents in a post Friday on CNN's website. American intelligence had detected a Soviet ship headed for Egypt that was believed to have been carrying nuclear weapons. They were going to try to annihilate Israel again. Folks, now you see why the former Soviet Union and now Russia is going to be the whipping boy to make an example out of anyone who tries to annihilate Israel. You see, we go back to Ezekiel 39 and verse 2, and we see, I will make you return, shub, to turn back or return. Look it up. He's going to cause them to return for annihilation, to lead them on to annihilation. To lead them to annihilation is what it means. Not leave back but the sixth part of you. will cause you to come up from the north parts and bring you to the mountains of Israel, and I will smite your bow out of your left hand, and cause your arrows to fall out of your right hand, and you shall fall upon the mountains of Israel. So obviously, the word for annihilation is correct. Now is Russia is orchestrating attempted annihilation of Israel again. Once again, playing Russian roulette with, as they say, Armageddon, destruction of the world. They plotted it 2 times before. So to the folks who've been claiming that Russia is innocent in this whole thing, Steve Ben-Noon and others, there are many others out there. You haven't read history. You don't read the Bible. And you're going to be caught unawares. And a warning to all these false preachers out there. The majority is always wrong. The flood proved it. So, running with the majority on false narratives concerning Daniel 9, the so-called 7th week, and nowhere in the Bible does it mention, and I quote, the 7th week, or the 70th week, I should say. Nowhere in Daniel 9 is the term 70th week mentioned, because it was not the 70th week. The week where Titus, the prince of the Romans, made a covenant with his Roman legions not to destroy the temple, so that he may take the temple to Rome, to the Pantheon in Rome, as a trophy. But his Roman legions lost control of themselves, and after 3.5 years, the war was over and the temple was destroyed. It's just that simple. That week is over. There is no such thing as a 70th week. The only thing that is left now is Joel 3. Joel 3 what? Let's read it. For behold, in those days and in that time, it should read, after I bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. Well, did he bring back the captivity, the exiles of Judah and Jerusalem? Yes, he did. It should read the Jews of Jerusalem. Okay? Because there's still many Jews out there. Many, many, many. Much more than what's there right now. So the Jews of Jerusalem. Verse 2, I will gather all Goyim and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will enter into judgment with them for what they did to my people, my heritage Israel, whom they had scattered among the nations, and parted my land. That's next. That's next, folks. Stop talking about the third temple. There's nothing written here in Joel 3 about the third temple. Stop claiming that there's another week left in Daniel 9 when there isn't any. The 70 weeks are finished. I've proven it time and time again. The only thing that's left is verse 2 of Joel 3. Because verse 1 is done. This is simple. A fifth grader can understand it. Somebody with a IQ of 70 could understand it. But people insist on listening to false narratives and then try to make those false narratives happen, entrenching themselves even worse into a grave, that ultimate grave. So I hope what I have done today has shown everyone that what we see is a repeat of 1967. Russia was trying to annihilate Israel. The proof, I brought you the proof that Russia was trying to annihilate Israel. I brought you the proof that Russia was once again trying to annihilate Israel in 1973. And they're going to have to come back and be judged for what they tried to do, because they tried to annihilate Israel. They themselves instead will be annihilated. It's just that simple. So, if you are alarmed, you should be. Nobody wants to see nuclear weapons flying around. But make no mistake about it. Israel twice was ready to use nuclear weapons against their enemies. They have 300 nuclear missiles. They have enough to destroy all their enemies. And remember, Ezekiel 39 says that the Northern Army's equipment is going to fail. Israel's not going to be nuked. We're right there at the cusp of a replay of the 67 war, folks. And it could bring about midnight. This cannot continue to happen over and over again without a bullet finally loading itself into the chamber on the one playing Russian roulette here. Judgment will come.